Hi, I'm Gamma Rays, and this is episode 3 of Exposing the Cult. Together, we sit down and take a look at the LGBT community, and we analyze how this extreme ideology has infiltrated it from within. Gender ideology is an extremist belief system that says that men aren't men and women aren't women, and children need to transition their genders because they don't adhere to binary norms. Last week, we discussed conversion therapy and the methods used to manipulate and control an individual into believing in something that is not in their nature. We went through several examples of how gender ideology extremists were implementing this manipulation into our society. Not only are they using these tactics on our children, but they're using them on us. In my opinion, based on the review of the BITE model, we are all under a form of mass conversion therapy. And I'm certain that we're going to dive deeper into that. However, for now, we're going to be discussing the accusations from the cult of gender ideology that anybody who doesn't get behind their belief system is a fascist. You know, it is interesting. While I was doing my research, Stephen Hassan's BITE model showed up for conversion therapy, fascism, socialism, and Marxism. I mean, anything that we discussed last week, we could literally pick that up and reapply it to how fascism works, and we would hit probably most, if not all, of the marks. But we're not going to do that. I think as a society, we have forgotten what fascism really is about and the root of it. And I think that the majority of people seem to associate fascism with right-wing nationalism, okay? But we need to go a little bit deeper than this. We need to look at all of the different components of what makes a fascist party and the types of behavior that they have. All right. Now, if you don't adhere to gender ideology, you're screamed a transphobe, a bigot, a fascist. This is their favorite thing to say to us, right? But I think that when you point fingers at someone, you need to do some reflection on yourself and the way that you are acting and your community might be acting. So we're going to first start with the basics tonight. And I am pulling up for us the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Holocaust Encyclopedia. Fascism. Fascism is a far-right political philosophy or theory of government that emerged in the 20th century. Fascism prioritizes the nation over the individual who exists to serve the nation. While fascist movements could be found in almost every country following World War I, fascism was most successful in Italy and in Germany. So some key facts. Number 1, fascism emerged as a political movement in the 20th century Europe, where Benito Mussolini founded the Partito Nazionale Fascista, National Fascist Party, in Italy in 1919. Key fact 2. Germany embraced fascism more than any other country. The Nazi government that ruled under Adolf Hitler between 1933 and 1945 was a fascist government. And number 3, fascism is a far-right theory of government that opposes the political philosophies of the Enlightenment and the 19th century, including democratic liberalism, communism, and socialism. Before we move forward, as we're going through this, they keep saying that fascists are nationalists. But I want you to separate the nationalist part from this text as we go through it, because then you'll be in the same mindset as me, okay? Take nationalism out of fascism, but leave everything else. Everything else. because I don't think that fascism just pertains to nationalism. I think it pertains to a specific ideology. So think about that as we go through. Fascism is an ultranationalist, authoritarian political philosophy. It combines elements of nationalism, militarism, economic self-sufficiency, and totalitarianism. It opposes communism, socialism, pluralism, individual rights and equality, and democratic government. Fascism places the importance of the nation above all else. The unity of the national community is prioritized above the rights of individuals. This leads to an intense interest in defining which groups belong or do not belong to the national body. Fascism is characterized by strident, often exclusionary nationalism, fixation with national decline, real or perceived, and threats to the existence of the national community, embrace of paramilitarism. In fascist states, violence is accepted, even celebrated, if it serves or advances the national community. For fascists, violence often have a redemptive or purifying quality. Okay, I'm going to stop us for a second. I want to just reread a couple of things here, but instead of using fascism, I'm going to use the trigger word trans. Now, there is a caveat to that, okay? I want to say something before I move forward with what I'm about to do. I understand that there are members of the trans community that do not stand for gender ideology. I get it. But the issue that stands is gender ideology is pushing transgenderism, transhumanism onto children. And in order for me to get my message across, I have to be very clear. Gender ideology places the importance of trans above all else. The unity of the LGBT community is prioritized above the rights of individuals, such as women and children. This leads to an intense interest in defining which genders belong or do not belong to the LGBT community. In gender ideology states, violence is accepted, even celebrated, if it serves or advances the LGBT community. For gender ideologists, violence often has a redemptive or purifying quality. Did that feel a little bit uncomfortable? It was definitely uncomfortable for me to have to read it that way, to say fascism replaced with gender ideology and politic and nationalism changed to transgenderism and LGBTQ community. But I'm not the first person to do this. Back in 2017, a trio of authors got together to develop a hoax. So I have here Wikipedia, which I'll link this. It's not my favorite source, but it is a good synopsis. At least it hasn't been modified yet. So this trio had concerns about the intellectual validity of much research influenced by postmodern philosophy and critical theory. These were highlighted by various academics who composed nonsensical hoax articles parodying the language and content of much research in the modern humanities and succeeded in having articles accepted for publication in academic journals. So, if I scroll down here, it says, by the time of the revelation, which was in 2018, because they were outed, someone figured out that this author was not a real person. Obviously, they were using fake names. 4 of 20 papers had been published, 3 were accepted but not yet published, 6 had been rejected, and 7 were still under review. Included among the articles that were published were arguments that dogs engage in rape culture. Men can reduce their transphobia by anally penetrating themselves with sex toys, as well as Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf rewritten in feminist language. So, for context on that, They literally took the word Jew and replaced it with man and pushed it as a feminist article. The first of these had won special recognition from the journal that published it. So, there is a video that I'm going to actually be pulling up. If you're listening, you'll be able to hear the content of it. If you're watching, it's actually going to be pulled up here on the screen for us to look at together.
Is the light okay in here? I just read my email. We have our first win. The dog park paper has been accepted. They don't know. We're about to tell them. Gotta read you something. Dear Dr. Helen Wilson, I have now closely considered the revisions of your manuscript, Dog Park, and will recommend its publication in Gender, Place, and Culture. You have done very good work to address the issues reviewers raised and have clarified your arguments. Thank you for your contribution to Gender, Place, and Culture, and I hope to be seeing your manuscript in print. Yours truly, PhD, Managing Editor, Gender, Place, and Culture. We have an accepted paper in the #1 feminist geography journal.
Since approximately June of 2017, I, along with two other concerned academics, Peter Bogosian and Helen Pluckrose, have been writing intentionally broken academic papers and submitting them to highly respected journals in fields that study gender, race, sexuality, and similar topics. We did this to expose a political corruption that's taken hold of the university. By this point, several of these papers have been accepted in highly respected journals, and one that claims that dog humping incidents can be taken as evidence of rape culture has been officially honored as excellent scholarship. I'm not going to lie to you, we had a lot of fun with this project.
The reviewers are worried that we didn't respect the dog's privacy.
That's the concern.
We respected their channels.
But don't let that lead you to believe that we're not
So they made all of
addressing
this
a
up.
serious
Like, they
problem.
didn't do this.
If you
They
have a
just
few
wrote
minutes,
something
I'll try to
ridiculous and it was
explain.
accepted.
To be clear up front, we think studying topics like gender, race, and sexuality is worthwhile, and getting it right is extremely important. The problem is how these topics are being studied right now. A culture has developed in which only certain conclusions are allowed, like those that make whiteness and masculinity problematic. The fields we're concerned about put social grievances ahead of objective truth. So as a simple summary, we call the problem grievance studies. To test the depth of this problem, my collaborators and I dedicated ourselves to a 1 to 2 year secret project targeting top grievance studies journals with an agreement to publicly release our findings, no matter what the outcome. We started officially on August 16, 2017, and by Thanksgiving we were in trouble. We had begun ambitiously and mostly stupidly. Our first papers were really only suited to test the hypothesis that we could penetrate their leading journals with poorly researched hoax papers. That wasn't the case, and we were wrong for thinking we might be able to. So by late November, it looked like all we'd accomplish is ruining our reputations.
If this doesn't achieve anything, it would actually frighten me.
We needed to change our approach, so we walked back from the hoaxing and began to engage with the existing scholarship in these fields more deeply. This led us to learn a lot more about the inner workings of grievance studies.
The best I can tap into is that there's this kind of like religious architecture in their mind where privilege is sin.
Okay, I'm going to pause it real quick. Let's talk about this. He says the religious mindset. I have said before that I believe gender ideology is a cult, but it is like pushed to the point of people practicing gender ideology as though it is a religion, worshiping people who are transgender, essentially. Like, that's what's happening here. And this group of authors, you know, they kind of went into this haphazardly, as they said, a little bit jokingly and everything. But when they had to flip that switch, right? Flip that switch and start to get into the mindset of the people who are accepting these articles, it took a very dark turn.
Privilege is evil, and they've identified education as the place where it has to be fixed.
So you can come up with these really nasty arguments like, well, let's put white kids in chains on the floor at school as an educational opportunity. And if you frame it in terms of overcoming privilege, and then you frame their resistance, that they won't want this to happen to them, that they would complain about this. If you frame that in terms of, oh, they only complain about that because they're privileged and they can't handle it because their privilege made them weak, then it's right in.
Papers started getting in.
You've got to be me that this happened!
By March, with 2 papers accepted and 1 published, it would be fair to say that we had become accepted grievance scholars. By June, it was 3, with 1 having been officially honored by the journal as excellent scholarship. By July, it was 5. By August, 7. This shouldn't have been possible. So far, what we're learning is rather astonishing, but the data we've gathered require more analysis to fully comprehend. What appears beyond dispute is that making absurd and horrible ideas sufficiently politically fashionable can get them validated at the highest levels of academic grievance studies.
Can we just look at that again real quick? Hold on. It couldn't have been that many seconds, right? I'm going to put it back here. What appears beyond dispute is that making absurd and horrible ideas sufficiently politically fashionable can get them validated. This is everything that we have been looking at and realizing, and we know, and we are being silenced for speaking up about these things. If you aren't woke, then you're anti-woke, and to the woke cult, because that's what it's become, you're the enemy, you're the fascist, right? But if you're only allowing publications to this extreme to go out, and you want society to feel guilty, like they wrote papers, he just said they wrote a paper of having white students chained to the ground so they would understand oppression. That is extremism. And the fact that that article actually got published because they want people to learn to feel some sort of responsibility for something that happened hundreds of years ago that they didn't do. How are we as a society supposed to be moving forward if we're only publishing things to make people feel guilty or feel bad about themselves?
Fashionable can get them validated at the highest levels of academic grievance studies.
We rewrote a section of Mein Kampf as intersectional feminism, and this journal has accepted it.
For those of you who don't know, Mein Kampf was Hitler's book. It was his manifesto. And they took the word Jew out and they replaced it with man, and they submitted it as a feminist's perspective. And it was accepted for publishment. That is absurdity. The fact that these scholars are approving these academic submissions to go out in the world and they don't even recognize or realize that they published Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf. That is insanity. That is extremism, allowing yourself to be blind and not know the facts. They didn't even they didn't fact check. If they had fact checked any of that, they would have realized that it was Mein Kampf, but they didn't even look into it. They just said, oh, wow, this is great. And if you are publishing Mein Kampf and you think that that is acceptable to be published in society, then maybe your ideology is the problem.
Social work.
This is deeply concerning because the work of grievance scholars goes on to be taught in classes, to design educational curricula, to be taken up by activists, to influence how media is produced, and to misinform journalists and politicians about the true nature of our cultural realities. No one tolerates this sort of corruption when they find out an industry is funding biased research to make itself look a certain way. The same scrutiny should apply to research when it pushes a political agenda. And we have uncovered enough evidence to suggest that this corruption is pervasive among many disciplines, including women's and gender studies, feminist studies, race studies, sexuality studies, fat studies, queer studies, cultural studies, and sociology. You may be thinking that the work done in these fields must be good, because it seems to continue the noble work of the civil rights movements. Well, after having spent a year immersed in it and becoming recognized as experts in it, we have to disagree. Grievance Studies does not continue the work of the civil rights movements. It corrupts it, and it trades upon their good names to keep pushing a kind of social snake oil onto a public that keeps getting sicker.
Hold on. There was just a sign. So for those listening, we're obviously looking at different images. There was some trans LGBTQ flag, but there was a sign, a billboard that just showed up.
To a public that keeps getting sicker.
Let's see. That's Trump. It just showed up and it says, Portland, is your white fragility showing? Why are we putting billboards up there to make people feel bad about their race, whatever race they are? This is the problem with the cult of gender ideology, right? This liberal leftist party wants to separate us by putting us into boxes. That's what they've done. They've put genders into boxes. They've put races into boxes. They don't want us united. They want us to feel guilty for being white. They want to polarize Black people. Like, for instance, Candace Owen was in an interview where the woman said, well, something about racism. And she goes, okay, well, let's get to the root of it. Earlier, you asked me, does it bother me about the number of people of color in the White House? And the host was like, I'm not racist. Why would you feel the need to bring that up to her? And Candace is exactly right. There's no reason for you to be bringing that up at all. Why not ask anybody else that question? You only direct it to the Black person at the table in the room, and that's it? Like, you're only going to be asking questions directed at her race? And then in this case, with the way the gender ideologists are, the Black women that I have seen speak up, the feminists that I communicate with who are Black and who speak up, they get horrifically racist comments. And then if a white woman like myself speaks up, I get called a cis het white woman, privileged in my body, in my biology, and in my skin, which is also really fucking racist, right? And they want to keep women of color, indigenous women, white women separated, Asian women. They don't want us communicating. They don't want us unifying. But that's what we radical feminists are doing. By the way, new wave radical feminists. We don't care about race, culture, religion, or politic. We women are uniting to stand up for our rights and protect our spaces and protect our children from indoctrination into this ideology. But let's finish this video.
Public that keeps getting sicker. Progress is easier without grievance studies. My collaborators and I are left-wing academics who can now say with confidence, these people don't speak for us. This is now a plea to all the progressives and minority groups these people claim to speak for. We suggest you spend some time critically engaging with the ideas coming out of these fields and decide for yourself whether they speak for you.
Okay. You should definitely take a look a little bit deeper at the grievance studies. I haven't checked to see the articles for those affairs. I actually just found out about this today, and I want to myself look at some of those articles. But one of the three authors, he was sitting there and he says, I think I'd actually be more afraid if nothing gets published. So what does he mean? Does he mean censorship? In my opinion, it was scary that any of those things were being published in that way and scholared and revered, right? Like this is questionable. This is very questionable. And this was 5 years ago that this happened, and it's only gotten quantifiably worse over time. And our students are being taught these things, these ideologies to give reparations in this way, like chain a white student to a class. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry. That is absolutely absurd. It's 2023. We should not be doing things like this, and we should not be justifying anything like that. It is inhumane and it is dehumanizing. So let's get back into fascism. And I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing already. I'm going to read a section to you, and then I'm going to switch out some of those words. Fascism rejects the practices of representative or liberal democratic government. It holds that these practices interfere with the expression of the national will. Instead, fascist governments are one-party states led by an authoritarian leader who claims to embody the national will. Fascists define the national will as advancing the interests of the national community. This usually means protecting or elevating the rights of the national community above the rights of those seen as alien, removing obstacles to national unity and suppressing those seen as challenging it, expanding the size and influence of the national state, often also seeking to expand territory through armed conflict. Protecting or elevating the rights of the LGBTQ community above the rights of those seen as cisgender. Removing obstacles to trans unity and suppressing those seen as challenging it. Expanding the size and influence of the LGBTQ community. Often also seeking to expand through conflict. And I say that they want to expand through conflict because they are literally beating women at women's rallies. Let Women Speak. March 2023, New Zealand. Hyde Park, London. April, early May 2023. You can Google it. Go check it out. Origins and development of fascism. Let's go ahead and scroll here a little bit, guys. All right. Fascism has its origins in the late 19th century. However, it became more defined during the turmoil of World War I. Following the war, fascist movements and parties existed across Europe and the United States. The Italian fascist movement, however, was the first to formally organize and stand for election. In 1919, Benito Mussolini founded the Partito Nazionale Fascista Party, the National Fascist Party, and in 1921, he was elected to the Italian Chamber of Deputies. The following year, Mussolini staged a march on Rome. He led 30,000 armed men through the streets to seize power as the Prime Minister of Italy. He established a dictatorship as Il Duce, the leader, with no responsibility to Parliament. And there's actually an image here of the March on Rome, with supporters during the March on Rome, after which the fascist leader was appointed Italian Prime Minister, October 1922. And it's just a bunch of men walking with an Italian flag. There's like an old-fashioned car, and they're just walking through this Italian roadway, and there's hundreds of them. Mussolini's success inspired other fascist movements across Europe. In Great Britain, Oswald Mosley met with Mussolini before he founded the British Union of Fascists in 1932. In Spain, Francisco Franco received support from Italy during the Spanish War. And in Germany, Adolf Hitler looked to the March on Rome as a model for the fascist takeover, which he attempted in the 1923 Munich beer hall Putsch. Fascism in Germany. Germany's collapse in World War I led to significant political instability as the new government, the Weimar Republic, tried to find its footing. Multiple groups emerged to challenge the Weimar Republic, including several fascist organizations. One of those organizations was the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, Germany's Worker Party, which Hitler joined as a member in 1919. In 1920, Hitler became the head of the party. He renamed it the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, or the Nazi Party. Real quick, I apologize for butchering the German. I don't speak it, but I tried. Now, I've been doing a little bit of research. Hitler had a presence when he spoke, but he was actually taken under the wing by a gentleman. And this man basically molded Hitler. He gave him the ability to carry himself, wore suits, had more of a presence than just his words. And Hitler really truly became like the propaganda for the Nazi party when it first started, for this worker party. And there was a point in time where he was like, this isn't enough for me. I want to be there was a premonition, I guess, of a man who would lead the Germans to victory and success and all of these things. It was some kind of prophecy, right? He was prophesized, and he wanted to be the man of the German prophecy. And so he did. Despite the reference to socialism and workers in the party name, Hitler promoted National Socialism as the complete opposite of socialism and communism. He promoted it as an ideology devoted to advancing the welfare and power of the German Volk, a national or ethnic group defined by its supposed race. The party developed a 25-point platform based on nationalism, anti-Semitism, and expansion. The program also called for overturning the Treaty of Versailles. To advance their agenda, the party formed paramilitary units called the Sturmabteilungen, Stormtroopers, or the SA. The NSDAP was a small fringe party in Germany in the early 1920s. In November 1923, the Nazis staged their own coup attempt known as the Munich Beer Hall Putsch. The coup began at the Burger Baukeller in Munich. The Nazis planned to seize control of the Bavarian state government before marching on Berlin to overthrow the Weimar Republic. They intended to establish a new state based on the unification of the German people, as envisioned in the 25 points. Unlike Mussolini's March on Rome, however, the Beer Hall Putsch failed. Hitler was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in jail, though he served only 8 months. I would just like to put a little disclaimer there for you guys. While Hitler was in jail for 8 months, he wrote Mein Kampf. So, when he was released, they made some kind of a law in which Hitler was not allowed to speak publicly. He was literally silenced, and he wasn't allowed to speak in certain German places. So he had to travel to be able to use his voice. So it had his being put in jail had a ripple effect, and it actually delayed the Nazi party from growing and getting more influence. But once his right to speak was given back to him, it became a snowball. So the Nazi state putting fascism into practice. Following Hitler's release from jail in 1924, the Nazi Party chose to pursue political power through the elections. In January 1933, Hitler became chancellor. He moved to dismantle the Weimar Republic and build the fascist single-party Third Reich. Following a series of legal, political, and propaganda maneuvers, the German Reichstag passed the Enabling Act on March 24, 1933. The Enabling Act became the cornerstone of Hitler's dictatorship and destroyed parliamentary democracy in Germany. It allowed Hitler to enact laws without approval of parliament or Reich President von Hindenburg. By July 1933, Hitler had banned all political parties other than the NSDAP. As the Führer, or leader, he began a process of consolidating power known as the Gleichschaltung, coordination, that enforced the Nazi Party authority over existing state institutions. Following a series of legal, political, and propaganda maneuvers, legally, they're trying to reduce consent for the ages of minors. They're trying to legalize minor transition. Washington State has become like a state in which children can run away from their parents to transition as a minor. Politically speaking, the left is just out of control. They're trying to enact a whole bunch of crazy laws, and they call us fascists for making parental Bill of Rights and making a women's Bill of Rights to protect women and to protect children and to make sure that parents know what their children are being taught in school. And propaganda? Oh my God. Women's History Month was only about transgender men. It was about men. They were pushing transgenderism down us. They've been doing it for months, and it has not stopped. This entire year has only been about the transgender agenda. Gender ideology is absolutely using propaganda. pro-transgender, anti-cis. That is very fascist. If you haven't looked into it, I've got a video on my Instagram. It is a cover of The Garden of Shadows, and it shows you imagery of the artist that Target had collaborated with in order to make Pride Month propaganda. And everything this artist puts out is destroy the system, CIS. The children, the trans children of the future will rise on the ashes of the trans adults of today. Like, it's weird. Transphobe collector, and it's a Grim Reaper. Like, they want to eradicate anybody who isn't trans, and they want trans to be the reality. They're pushing transhumanism. They're pushing the mutilation and body modification of children onto our children, onto us as adults, onto society. So much so that Putin has made fun of us for it. Not really made fun of. I think he was actually genuinely concerned about our well-being. Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to this encyclopedia. Having achieved total control over Germany, Hitler and the Nazi Party began to implement other aspects of the fascist agenda. They began with the effort to create the ideal German national community defined along racial lines, known as the Volksgemeinschaft. This effort was a two-part process. First, it entailed uniting all ethnic Germans in a single German state. Second, it excluded all minorities already within the German state who did not belong in the national community, especially Jews. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss. The Anschluss created a greater German state many German nationalists had dreamed of since 1848. A few months later, Germany seized the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia with the tacit permission of the Munich Agreement. When World War II began in 1939, one of the Nazis' central war aims was to expand Germany's territorial boundaries and influence so that all ethnic Germans could be together and that Germany would have the Lebensraum, living space, that the Nazis believed was necessary for the nation to survive and grow. I really do think that gender ideology is using the LGBT to draw gender lines. And what they're doing is they're saying, if you're not a member of this community, if you are not trans, specifically, if you are not trans, you are cis. And basically, if you don't accept cis, then you are the enemy. And I've even seen videos of members of the trans community saying that cis allies are the problem. So they're turning their backs on their actual allies. And these allies are like these crazy TRAs, trans right activists, that don't even realize that the trans community doesn't even like them. Gender ideology is separating society between trans and cis. They are dividing us. They have drawn a gender line. And when you create laws like in Washington, a safe haven law, right, to draw transgender people to you and bring them to you because they want to transition children. So families are fleeing states where they feel like, oh, my trans child is at risk of death. What? How? How is your child at risk of death? They're not having surgery performed on them. They're not taking medication that is experimental. They're not having a double mastectomy. They're not being put under the knife. They're not having their manhood cut off. Like, what is putting the child at danger? A mental illness that or an ideology that encourages them to unalive themselves simply because they can't transition or take puberty blockers? That sounds like child abuse. So you're fleeing a state because you can't abuse your child. They are actually starting to divide us by creating these crazy laws. In Washington state, they say they can take your child from you if you misgender or do not transition them. They'll take the child. The state will take the child. They are creating these lines for us. It's already happening. We're already seeing this happen here. And it's not because we're trying to prevent child mutilation. It's because they want it to happen. They want transgenderism, transhumanism to happen. That is why I believe that they are the fascist cult. They are trying to look at us and say, you're fascist because you won't let us exist and trans is the reality. No. Fascism is silencing women, silencing any parents who speak up. Censorship is fascism. Having a dissenting opinion from this minority group, which the NSDAP, they were a minority group. And they were able to take over. Why? Because Hitler would tell one group of people this, and one group of people that, and one group of people this, until he had all of them wanting to support him. And then he flipped on them and did what he really wanted to do and implemented what he really wanted to implement, even if the people who were supporting him didn't actually want those things to happen. He manipulated all of them. And while gender ideology may not have a Führer that we can point to and say, you are the root of the problem, this ideology, it goes deeper than that. And we together are uncovering it. So there's only 2 more paragraphs on this page. We're going to go ahead and finish reading through those. The Nazis also focused on cleansing the national community at home. They worked to eliminate supposed threats to its health and unity. For instance, they imprisoned in concentration camps Germans seen as political opponents, criminally inclined, or asocial. They also forcibly sterilized Germans with mental or physical disabilities. In addition, the Nazis moved to isolate and drive out persons considered racially alien to the national community because they supposedly threatened its purity and security. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws redefined German citizenship, excluding non-Aryans, particularly Jews. Escalating persecution and violence isolated German Jews, depriving them of their property, livelihoods, access to education, and markets and public facilities, with the intention of forcing them to immigrate. The Nazis framed World War II as the ultimate struggle for the survival of the German Volk. They used the war to justify the most radical measures against both internal and alien enemies, including murdering mentally and physically disabled Germans and exterminating all of the Jews in Europe. What was done was horrifying. It is one of the darkest parts of our history, and we cannot continue to take the word fascist and throw it around just willy-nilly like gender ideology cultists do. They scream fascism, 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 right? But here's the thing. They are the ones who are trying to they're trying to criminalize us misgendering them. I've said this before. Dylan Mulvaney said, I think if you misgender someone, you should be put in jail. They're trying to push for these kinds of things. They want to imprison anybody who misgenders them. They don't like political opponents. They are sterilizing themselves. They're sterilizing themselves. And I've been watching this like wave, right? So especially on TikTok. They're like, oh, everybody's trans has been around forever. And guys, did you realize that a lot of trans people are autistic people? Yeah, like most of us have autism. Now there's this whole thing, this whole wave where everybody is saying, if you're autistic, you're trans. That to me is absolutely fucking batshit. That's not true. First of all, that is fundamentally not true. That there is no proof that every single autistic person is trans. And that's the kind of things that I'm seeing on TikTok. But they're the only people who are killing themselves and committing genocide is them. They are trying to push an agenda on other citizens. They want to modify our education. They want to cancel culture you of impacting people's livelihoods, which means that they can lose their property. They're just trying to force everybody to accept an ideology. It's not to immigrate, but to accept an ideology. And they have threatened violence. They have formed groups in which they parade around certain towns in the United States with actual AK-47s to protect the trans community and allow them to be able to use whatever bathrooms they want. Hi, how are you? You know, I think that it is absolutely ridiculous to say that defining a woman as a biological female is a fascist thing to do. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that a man with a penis is more womanly than a woman and should just be inherently accepted into a female space. And if he gets a hard-on, oh, well, no big deal. Absolutely not. This is completely unacceptable. So there's two more things we're going to take a look at tonight. But first, we're going to look at the evolution of Nazi anti-Jewish policy in wartime. And I think that this is important because in gender ideology, it seems to be that there is an anti-cis undertone to everything. During the 1930s and 1940s, Nazi policy towards Jews evolved. Initially, the Nazi leadership aimed to dispossess Germany's Jews of their rights and property. This policy, the Nazis hoped, would force Jews to immigrate. Few countries, however, were eager to accept impoverished refugees. The outbreak of World War II largely brought an end to mass Jewish immigration from Nazi Germany. German military success in wartime brought millions of European Jews under Nazi control. The Nazi regime adopted increasingly radical measures, including expulsions, removals, resettlements, and ultimately mass murder. Following the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the German SS, police, army units, and local collaborators carried out mass shootings of Soviet officials as well as of Russian Jews and Roma. In early 1942, Nazi Germany initiated the final solution to the Jewish question, to eradicate all of Europe's Jews. German propagandists aided in the process. They helped to foster a climate of indifference, hate, and fear that made expulsions, deportations, and eventually mass murder possible. I mentioned to you the artwork from the collabed artist with Target, which was why Target lost $9 billion in profit. The propaganda that comes out from this trans community, these gender ideology cultists, is completely anti-cis, anti-cis, anti-cis. And the thing is, we didn't categorize ourselves as cisgender. They decided that we were cisgender. Just like Hitler and the Nazis decided the Jews were the enemy. He chose to hate Jews out of jealousy, out of spite, out of whatever it may have been. He did not like them. And I think that might have stemmed from his childhood. I believe I had watched a documentary earlier today in which they were talking about his dying mother was under the care of a Jewish doctor. And I think from that point on, he no longer liked Jews. He just made that decision and it altered his life forever. I think that gender ideology needed an enemy and they chose to make it us normal men and women who exist in society, who may or may not believe in God, but absolutely believe that we are not born in the wrong body, that mental illness is real and needs to be addressed, but mutilation is never, ever the answer. Blocking puberty is not the answer. Their extreme hate, they cause a climate of indifference. They say that they fear for their lives, but they also try to intimidate us to make us fear them. They want to take away women's rights to women's spaces. Title IX was the 1970s. You know, I've done this on TikTok, but let me give you a little women's history real quick. In the 1880s, women finally got the bathrooms in public spaces. We were on urinary leashes prior to that. In the 1920s, 1920 to be specific, we finally got the right to vote. Not all states gave Black women the right to vote. It took approximately 60 years for that to work itself out. In the 1970s and 80s, women finally were able to own a bank account without a man's name or signature. Women were finally able to buy their own home without a man's name or signature to sign off. And women were finally, and definitely in the 80s, able to own their own businesses. Oh, and in 1970s, Title IX happened so that women were finally able to wear PE uniforms and have their own sports. It is only 2023, 103 years of the right to vote. You would think, oh, well, it's been 150 since you got the bathroom, so why don't we just let everybody use it? No. You don't understand. Women were on a urinary leash. That meant they could not go beyond the bounds of their home and out in society, because if they needed to relieve themselves, they needed to be able to go back to their houses, because men's bathrooms were the only bathrooms available in society, and women had to fight for that right. That was one of the first things suffragettes did before they got the right to vote, is they rallied together for us to be able to take a piss in public. And women they didn't even have 100 years, okay? They had about 70 years of their own bathrooms, because John Money pushed transgenderism in the 1950s and 60s, and he started transitioning men into women, and they started using our spaces in our bathrooms. And then the nefarious men started to slip in and started to take advantage of the situation and put the dress on and go in and steal a little girl or rape a woman or rape the girl. These things have happened for decades. And now gender ideology has pushed it into the extreme, and they're saying, you don't have to be without your penis to be trans. You are trans. Self-ID. It's okay. You ID as a woman. You deserve to be in a domestic violence shelter, and you have a criminal record against women. That doesn't matter. You are a woman, so you deserve to be in women's prisons. Really? A man who has 12 or more assault records and rape assault records on their fucking books is allowed to be in a female prison with females where women are being raped? There's a Swedish study. It is on the UK Parliament website. You can take a look at it. 58.9% of all trans identifying women, okay, have assault records and abuse records against women. Sexual assault records against women. 58.9% of those who have transitioned to women or identified as trans women and wanted to be put into female prisons already had violent records against women. And you want to put those men into women's prisons? They're punishing women for existing as women. Going on a bit of a tangent now about women, but it really pisses me off. I mean, gender ideology is out here removing women's rights, changing our terminology. They want us to just accept a new reality that we don't believe in. And it's extremely radical in the worst way. I know I call myself a radical feminist, but I have to be a radical feminist to stand against a cult, don't I? Because the cult is somehow what is normal now? I don't think so. The only group of people who has been causing indifference and hate has been gender ideologists, and they are doing it for a reason. They slipped in through the LGBT community. They added their T onto the end, which LGB is a sexuality. It is not a gender ideology transition. They attached themselves to what once was a loving and prideful community. They took advantage of the situation. They have turned the pride flag into a trans flag, and they have taken over this community. Now, on this same page, there was wartime anti-Semitic propaganda, okay? There is so much anti-cis propaganda out there right now. It's absolutely deplorable. Please go to TERFisaslur.com. I will actually go ahead and put that into the description. You will get to start seeing all of the things that you need to know about what is being pushed by gender ideologists, by this cult. So, The Nazis sought to provoke hatred of Germany's Jews by transforming them from ordinary neighbors into internal enemies, guilty of starting wars and betraying Germany from within. Like I said, the trans community has started turning on the lesbians and the gays from within. They turned on women first, they turned on their cis allies, and they even turned on their own community members. If you detransitioned, you were never really trans. Even if you spent over a decade or 20 years trans and you detransition, they're saying that you were never trans. They're so deluded in this ideology. On posters and in speeches, newsreels and radio programs, Nazis demonized and dehumanized European Jews. Okay, on posters and in speeches, newsreels and radio programs, trans demonized and dehumanized women and cisgendered persons. They depicted European Jews as carriers of deadly diseases such as typhus to justify segregating them into ghettos. They identified European Jews as a violent threat, calling them bandits or terrorists. They identified cisgendered as violent threats, calling them bandits and terrorists or bigots and transphobes. Nazi propaganda held the Jews responsible for causing World War II, for which they would have to pay. All Jews, Hitler's propagandists proclaimed, were accomplices in the international plot to enslave the non-Jewish world. Using false claims, Nazi propaganda presented its war against Jews as a struggle between good and evil. Gender ideology cultists are using propaganda to say that anyone who is cis and does not accept cis, does not accept terminology, does not accept this ideology, is evil. They are saying that we should be imprisoned. They are saying that we should be eradicated. I've got a lovely video from a lovely, lovely man who identifies as a trans woman telling cisgendered people, specifically who he called transphobes, to unalive ourselves and eradicate ourselves. Eradicate ourselves from this world. There are no cisgendered people that I have seen, as they would say, cisgendered. There's no normal biological fucking people out here in the world telling people to kill themselves. None of us are doing that. The only community wanting to threaten violence, being physically violent and actually killing themselves or threatening and actually killing other people is coming from the gender ideology cult. That's it. That's literally what's happening. During World War II, Nazi propagandists purposefully linked the Jews with Germany military foes. They created a myth of evil string-pulling Jews, manipulating the leaders of the U.S., Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. Nazi propaganda aimed to unmask foreign Jewish conspirators who were operating behind the scenes. This poster epitomizes the technique by pulling back the curtains to expose the Jews as the dark force behind enemy powers in Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Yeah, so there's a picture here. Behind the enemy powers, the Jew. And it's a man standing behind, it's a Jew standing behind an American flag and a Russian flag. Actually, it's the Marxist flag because that's the Marxist symbol right there. Let's see. Nazi poster portrays Polish Jews as carriers of lice and typhus. It plays upon the fear of disease and urges Poles to protect yourself from typhus. Avoid the Jews. Nazi authorities in German-occupied Poland circulated these posters to discourage Poles from providing food or shelter to Jews fleeing the ghettos. Oh my God. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I decided to take a minute to myself, step away, have a sip of coffee, stretch my legs before I came back to sit down. And while I did that, this lovely little gem showed up on my newsfeed on Twitter. And I'm going to read you a tweet that just came across my way. This was posted 12:18 p.m., May 27th, 2023. It has 2.1 million views. This is by Travis @Travis_in_Flint. Update. Yesterday, it was reported that Target stores in Ohio received multiple bomb threats. Initially, it was suspected that the threats came from someone upset about the Pride display, but new details show it was actually an LGBTQ plus ally who said the bomb threats would continue until the LGBTQ items were brought back and put on display. Below is the email that was sent regarding the threats. So this is to members at timcast.com, and it is from an Alsan Akhmedov. I don't know that this is a real person. It's probably just someone using a Middle Eastern name because it sounds more nefarious. And they're, again, race baiting with that name. Target is full of fucking cowards who turned their back on the LGBTQ community and decided to cater to their homophobic right-wing redneck bigots who protested and vandalized their store. We won't stand idly by as far as the right continues to hunt us down. We are sending you a message. We placed a bomb at the following targets: 4200 Kent Road, Stowe, Ohio; 5584 Dressler Road Northwest, North Canton, Ohio; 417 Boardman Poland Road, Boardman, Ohio; 5555 Youngstown Warrington Road, Niles, Ohio; 87 Wagner Road, Monica, Pennsylvania. We will continue to bomb your targets until you stop cowering and bring back your LGBTQ merchandise. We will not be erased. We won't go quietly. Have I not sat here and told you guys for 3 episodes now that the only community threatening violence on others and themselves is the LGBTQ community because of gender ideology? That is exactly what is happening here. Women and mothers and parents have been using their buying power in a capitalist society and refusing to buy from companies that are pushing an ideology onto us. It was successful with Bud Light, who lost $6 billion. Target, $9 billion. We are successfully pushing the market to prove a fucking point. And again, the only reason these companies are doing this is because of a woke meter created by the HRC, which is pure propaganda. And I might have to dedicate a literal entire episode just to the HRC. Threatening violence into complicitness is exactly what fascists did. And they acted upon it. So let's look at some of these replies, right? Such a loving and peaceful crowd. The tolerant left. This madness will end corporations taking a side in culture war. It's a lose-lose situation. Product and service providers who stay out of the conflict will prosper. They're proving that we are right to boycott them. Way to go, trans terrorists, for proving our points. These corporations need to just stop playing politics these days or taking up the social issues. No matter which way they play it, they will alienate half of their potential customers on a good day, or they'll alienate everyone like this. The violent and militant left strikes again. Typical. If they're not really victims, they'll make up a threat. Gee, I'm utterly shocked and amazed. Who would have thought that this said the TQ plus brigade, known for its nuanced and measured bouts of sanity, would threaten something of this sort? Not to mention, I still haven't seen the trans manifesto from the shooter. What was her name? God, Abby or something like that. You know what? I can't even think of her name, but the recent shooting back in, I believe it was late March, early April, where the 3 adults and 3 children were murdered by a woman who identified as a trans man. Yeah. She wrote a manifesto. I still haven't seen that, and I keep trying to find it. Someone here says, hunt us down, quote unquote. They do love their hyperbole. There was a fake. Okay, I'm scrolling down. Someone used a screenshot of a Target that was vandalized. This isn't true, guys. The Target that was fully vandalized in a video that went viral on Twitter, it was actually from a George Floyd riot. So it was left-wing liberals who vandalized that Target. And someone today shared it as like a a way to entice people and get their attraction and make them come to his Twitter space and said, oh man, guys, check this footage out. Did the right-wing people do this as a result of the LGBTQ plus pride stuff? No, you were just trying to get people to come to your page, and you're baiting people. Literally, you're baiting people, and it's dumb. Stop promoting false narratives to bait people to get them to follow you. If people follow me, I want them to follow me for facts. I want them to follow me for truth. And I want them to follow me because they like the things that I have to say, not because I'm doing things or promoting things that are not true. I only address the things that I know to be true. Do I know 100% that this email is completely authentic? No, that's why I'm scrolling through here. But it honestly doesn't fucking surprise me, you know? So this was posted at like noon today? So I wonder if I can Snope it. You think we can Snope it? 809 bookmarks, quotes, retweets. Let's look at quotes, right? Because people will say something. It's always someone on the left. Liberalism is a mental disease. It's always a Fred or a lefty. Oh, I'm sorry. It's always either a Fed or a lefty. 100% guarantee it's unhinged liberals calling in and pretending to be MAGA while making these threats. Jussie Smollett all over again. Oh my God. Nothing says we just want to be equal like threatening to blow people up if you don't get preferential, not equal treatment. And they're right. Fascists didn't want equal treatment. They wanted preferential treatment. That's why they had the Aryan race, right? Their Aryan German race. They preferred the Aryan Germans to the Jews and anybody else. And they got rid of everybody that they felt was not perfect for the German regime. They if you didn't fall into a specific set of rules, you were ousted. And with gender ideology, you must follow into this really fucked up set of rules or you're out. And they're trying to normalize something that is inhumane and honestly immoral. We have a foundation. This society was built on a foundation, and we can sit here and say it wasn't built on a foundation of God. No, our morality comes from it. This country was built on Christianity. We have a level of morality and conservatism that is important to have in society. And you know what? That's actually going to be my segue. Putin recently made a speech, and this speech was riveting. And it has to do with the Bolsheviks and Marxism and Putin's reflection on what's going on right now here in the West. The video that I'm going to show you was a tweet by, I believe, Billboard Chris. And it was actually a YouTuber's video. And we'll see his name at the end. And I will find that video and attach it in the description. I just can't think of it off the top of my head right this second. But I'm going to go ahead and pull this one up for us. I think it's back on my page. I tweeted it just last night. Lots to do, lots to tweet. Make sure you go and check things out. Here it is. And I say he isn't wrong. Okay, let's watch it.
We look in amazement at the processes underway in the countries, which have been traditionally looked at as the standard bearers of progress. Of course, the social and cultural shocks that are taking place in the United States and Western Europe are none of our business.
Gender
we are
ideology.
keeping out of this. Some people in the West believe that an aggressive elimination of entire pages from their own history reverse discrimination against the majority of the interests of a minority and the demand to give up the traditional notions of mother, father, family, and even gender.
Gender ideology.
They believe that all of these are the mileposts on the path towards social renewal. The advocates of so-called social progress believe they are introducing humanity to some kind of a new and better consciousness. Godspeed, hoist the flags, as we say. Go right ahead. The only thing that I want to say now is that their prescriptions are not new at all.
Putin is about to lay some history on us right now. And I watched this and I just sat in silence when I first saw this. This is larger than a TikTok bullshit. This is bigger than just America. This is Canada. This is Australia. This is New Zealand. This is Ireland. This is the UK. This is a global social contagion, and this cult is spreading like wildfire. It has become a religion. It has literally become religion. What other cults, right, have spread like this around the world? Religious cults. Scientology, right? This is wild.
It may come as a surprise to some people, but Russia has been there already. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks, relying on the dogmas of Marx and Engels, also said that they would change existing ways and customs. And not just political and economic ones, but the very notion of human morality and the foundations of a healthy society. The destruction of age-old values, religion, and relations between people, up to and including the total rejection of family. We had that too. Encouragement to inform on loved ones. All this was proclaimed progress and, by the way, was widely supported around the world back then.
Inform on loved ones. Telling on your loved ones. If your parents misgender you, tell us at school and we will take you from your parents to a safe place. Your parents can be fined for misgendering you. Your parents can lose their rights to you if they misgender you.
And was quite fashionable, same as today. The fight for equality and against discrimination has turned into aggressive dogmatism bordering on absurdity. When the works of the great authors of the past, such as Shakespeare, are no longer taught at schools or university because their ideas are believed to be backward. The classics are declared backward and ignorant of the importance of gender or race. In Hollywood, memos are distributed about the proper storytelling and how many
Black trans
characters
lives
of what
matter.
color or gender should be in a movie. This is even worse than the agitprop department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Countering acts of racism is a necessary and noble cause, but the new cancel culture has turned it into reverse discrimination, that is, reverse racism.
So, for those just listening and not watching, there are images of statues in the United States being pulled down and people spray painting them. Right now, there's an image of white people sitting at the feet of a black couple or two black individuals, like washing their feet.
The obsessive emphasis on race is further dividing people, when the real fighters for civil rights dreamed precisely about erasing differences and refusing to divide people by skin color. I specifically asked my colleagues to find the following quote from Martin Luther King. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by their character. This is the true value. However, things are turning out differently there. By the way, the absolute majority of Russian people do not think that the color of a person's skin or their gender is an important matter. Each of us is a human being. That is what matters. In a number of Western countries, the debate over men's and women's rights has turned into a perfect phantasmagoria. Zealots of these new approaches even go so far as to want to abolish these concepts altogether. Anyone who dares mention that men and women actually exist, which is a biological fact, risk being ostracized.
Thank you, Putin. I mean, I'm literally thanking Putin right now. He is speaking truth. This social contagion has spread so far and wide, and it is so at the cusp for the world right now that he is telling us this is a problem. And fascists were the ones who were silencing dissenting opinions. They were the ones controlling the narrative, pushing a specific agenda to push what was for them the Nationalist Worker Party, and gender ideology pushes for them the gender ideology mentality. This liberal left party is pushing transgenderism onto us as a society, silencing us for having dissenting opinion, threatening violence on us. This is all Stephen Hassan's authoritarian control model. And I absolutely think the fascists are truly the gender ideologists, and they keep pointing to us. And the Grievance study goes to show that people are believing that the right is the fascist party, that more conservative individuals are the fascists, because they're so brainwashed by the cult ideology that they have to think that the right is fascist, because they have to put themselves in the mindset of, I'm the oppressor, I'm oppressive, I'm privileged, and I need to uplift this transgenderism, because they're the ones who are oppressed. They're the ones who need to be the special cased preference minority. It's all connected, and if you're not getting hip with it, what am I not explaining right? All right, Putin, keep laying it out.
Parent number 1 and parent number 2. Birthing parent instead of mother and human milk, replacing breast milk. Because it might upset the people who are unsure about their own gender. I repeat, this is nothing new. In the 1920s, the so-called Soviet Kulturträgers also invented some new speak, believing they were creating a new consciousness and changing values that way.
Newspeak. That is my new favorite word to refer to the gender ideology terminology. I'm going to call it Newspeak from now on.
Not to mention some truly monstrous things when children are taught from an early age that a boy can easily become a girl and vice versa. That is, the teachers actually impose on them a choice we all supposedly have. They do so while shutting the parents out of the process and forcing the child to make decisions that can upend their entire life.
Just for context, for those who are listening and not watching the video right now, there's imagery of children doing drag dances and all kinds of things, putting on makeup, dressing as a girl, dressing as a boy when they are a girl, when they are the opposite sex, right?
They do not even bother to consult with the child's psychologist. Is a child at this age even capable of making a decision of this kind? Calling a spade, this verges on a crime against humanity, and it's being done in the name and under the banner of progress. Well, if someone likes this, let them do it. I've already mentioned that in shaping our approaches, we will be guided by a healthy conservatism.
A healthy conservatism as in not mutilating future generations of children. We're eradicating an entire population and generation of children by providing puberty blockers that have long-term impact to fertility, by having double mastectomies, which means that a mother, if she is lucky enough to get pregnant, not to mention the potential birth defects or issues that her child is going to have when they're born, but by taking the breasts away and removing those milk ducts, that means they're going to be reliant upon the government providing powder, baby formula. And we all saw what happened in 2020 and 2021. The formula was no good. There was a lack of formula on the shelves. I was lucky and fortunate enough that when I was pregnant, I had started collecting formula just in case I couldn't breastfeed for my child. And when this happened, I immediately went to my shelves. I checked all the codes, made sure things were okay. And I literally gave my formula away to women who needed to be able to feed their children. So they are causing an entire generation of women to be infertile, or not be able to breastfeed their own child, which means that they will be reliant upon corporation-provided formula and government-issued formula, or government-approved formula, I should say. That, to me, doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right at all.
That was a few years ago, when passions on the international arena were not yet running as high as they are now, although, of course, we can say that clouds were gathering even then. Now, when the world is going through a structural disruption, the importance of reasonable conservatism as the foundation for a political course has skyrocketed, precisely because of the multiplying risks and dangers and the fragility of the reality around us.
He's right. There is fragility around us. I mean, this is, God, you know, the fact that Putin's speech is something that I wish our presidents were saying is wild. It's wild. So we covered a lot in episode 3. We talked about the origin of fascism. We detoured to the Grievances study and discussed that a little bit and what's going on with our scholarly articles that are being published and winning awards for extremist ideology and views. We discussed propaganda, and we saw a tweet that, as I can say, it's alleged right now. Whether or not it gets confirmed, I don't know. But we saw a tweet in regards to an LGBTQ member threatening to bomb multiple target locations for taking the Pride stuff away. So they're trying to bully these companies into complying with their ideology and their agenda. And then we watched Putin, who made the most sense I have seen any leader make sense of this entire situation in months. He came out and he spoke to what's going on. He talked about history. He talked about fact. He talked about the damage that this can cause. And he says, if you want to do it, go ahead, more power to you. But see, here's the problem. That's what we've been doing. We've said, you want to change your gender, go ahead, no problem. But now it's gotten to a point where it's become a problem because it's come so far that they're starting to try to take away women's terms, women's spaces, women's rights. They're coming for our children, and we are no longer standing for it. We are standing united with the men who stand with us to protect our children, and we will not allow this to continue to happen. I don't know what I'm going to talk about next week. I think maybe we might touch on Marxism and socialism a little bit, but unless something else comes up that I think might be more pertinent, let's kind of plan for those. If you have any questions for me, please, by all means, leave some comments. I love to see them, and I love to address them in the following upcoming episodes. Make sure to hit that link tree and like and subscribe on all of my socials. We're on Gamma Rays 3.0 on TikTok now. If you manage to make it into 1 and 2, more power to you. Those are going to still be locked down until August because I've got 7 and 8 strikes on them. So I cannot unlock those until those strikes fall off, and it takes 90 days. So 3.0, we're there. I will see you next time as we continue exposing the cult. Bye.